Hello, everybody. My name is Steve Shelton. I'm the founder and chief resilience officer for Green Shoe Consulting. I appreciate the opportunity to spend some time with you today. I apologize that I'm not with you at the Space Center in person, but I'd like to be able to give you a brief rundown of some very important research that we've conducted as well as go through some components that Rob and the Metals and Mining ISAC have actually conducted as well. So we're going to talk about both these things in the terms of mental health, in terms of workplace performance, and how to manage stress, alleviate, prevent burnout, and show up as your best, whether it's in the workplace environment, at home, etc. So, with that being said, the title of this presentation is Are You Driving Resilience or Are You Dousing the Flames? So jumping forward here, just to kind of reiterate what I mentioned, I'm going to give a quick overview of the research that we did. So we partnered with academic researchers out of the University of Guelph to make this a empirical study. This is the first empirical study on stress and burnout in the cybersecurity environments to be done to date, to my knowledge. So, with that being said, we interviewed 40 CISOs across the United States. We wanted to keep this as a very specified type of sample for our research, and we went through both qualitative and quantitative components. I'll talk more about that. I'll go through our methodology, why we did the research, how we did it, but most importantly, the key findings. Within the key findings, I'm also going to pull in, as I mentioned, Rob and the Metal Mining ISAC survey that they had done with 30 members, 30 individuals as part of the group there. And then I'm going to go into what some forward-looking statements, excuse me, but more importantly, what can you actually do about it? And the action items that you can do individually, as a team, and organizationally, excuse me, and then provide a very brief and simple call to action. So, jumping forward into it, the first thing I wanted to do is I'd like you to think about this specific scale in terms of how burnt out do you feel? On a scale of 1 to 10, or 0 to 10 in this case, 0, you have no pain whatsoever, everything is awesome. 10 is you have so much burnout, you probably need to go to the hospital right now. Where would you rank yourself or score yourself on this scale? However you deem that to be. So when you have that number in your mind, I want you to hold on to that because part of the challenge here and the reason that I asked this is that this is one of the questions we started off our research with. And I'll circle back as to why this is important. But after we had everyone rate themselves or score themselves on that scale, we then explained what the actual burnout symptoms are. So, as part of that question, in terms of how you scored yourself, what were the symptoms or the things that helped you come to that conclusion or score? And when we did this in the research, we then went through what the actual burnout symptoms are. There's three of them. The first one is emotional and physical exhaustion. When you feel physically exhausted, it's hard to get out of bed in the morning. It's hard to stick to a movement or exercise routine. Often it's hard to eat well. It's definitely hard to sleep well. And when you're emotionally exhausted, that sleep creeps in and then it makes it harder for you to have effective decisions. You're probably more irritable, more cranky, not so great to deal with. The second component then or symptom is cynicism. This aspect that you have a negative response to your job, to the work that you do, to the environment, to your boss, a variety of things, to where you're no longer concerned about how much effort you put into the work that you're doing or the quality of the work that you're doing, and you really just don't care as much anymore. So there's a detachment to the job. The third and final symptom then is professional inefficacy. It feels like one, there's no meaning in the work that you're doing or purpose. And then also, it really doesn't feel like anything you do matters, that you're not moving the needle forward on any of the work that you're doing, etc. Those three things are what we focus on or really equate to burnout. And it leads to this feeling that Johnny Paycheck so cleverly puts together here in his song, Take This Job and Shove It. So, why did we do this research? Part of the reason was that, but there's a lot of issues that make the job in cybersecurity very, very challenging. So we wanted to shine a light on the suffering in the industry. There are high rates of turnover in the industry, high rates of stress or distress, as we call it, high rates of burnout. The job itself is very challenging, depending on where you look at the statistics. CISO tenures range anywhere between 18 to 24 months, roughly. That's not a very long, sustainable career as a CISO. Heidrick and Struggle, a company in the Chicagoland area, had been putting out a global CISO survey for years. I'm not sure what's happened to it over the past couple of years, but back in 2023, 69% of CISOs that responded in the survey, and that was thousands globally, said that they were worried about burnout for not only their physical health, but their career. So all of these things now, including the aspect where, thanks to the Uber situation and their breach, that CISOs now carry some liability for themselves, which is a very different role in some of the other business unit leaders. And then also AI now coming in, there are additional and just compounded threats. The attack surface is very challenging to meet, and there seems to be no way to catch up. And now with companies laying more people off, asking, thanks to the inclusion of AI into the environments, asking cybersecurity teams to do more or the same, if not more, with less, all these things make it very challenging. Um, I basically covered it on that, so I'm going to skip forward. The methodology that we use, so as I mentioned, we partnered with academic researchers out of the University of Guelph. We interviewed 40 CISOs across the United States for focusing on Fortune 1000 companies. We realized pretty shortly into the research that Fortune 1000 companies excluded um, uh, state, local governments, education, healthcare organizations, et cetera. So we started to expand the scope to include some of those folks too. And then we set up a very brief questionnaire that the CISOs could fill out after the interviews. And then the interviews were focused on 15 primary questions. I expanded on those, but they were semi-structured interviews that lasted an hour long, essentially. And those were done over Zoom. So after doing that, they used my academic researchers utilized trend research analysis to be able to come up with a variety of different trends, which we're going to get into here now. In terms of how to use this research, one, use this as a guide individually to be able to manage your own state, learn more about yourself in terms of how you respond to stress, how it manifests for you, and develop some coping skills as a leader of a team to be able to help support your team as well. Rob LeBay is a very big advocate of this, which I'm sure he's talking about throughout the conference. And then organizationally, being able to make some changes that are not huge lifts and shifts where you have to pay millions of dollars to have a large consulting firm come in and make some changes that may or may not support and create the outcomes that you're looking for, but be able to do some very pragmatic and actionable changes that actually lead to lessening the burden of stress that gets applied to your team and to yourselves. With that being said, let's jump into the key findings. The first one, which is what gets into that original question of scoring yourself on the burnout scale, was that we found burnout exists on a spectrum. There's a variety of components and variables and environments that lead to higher burnout rates than other environments. But one of the biggest challenges that we encountered was the majority of the participants struggled to really identify how stress manifests for them physically, mentally, and emotionally. Part of the challenge behind this is that most of us are not measuring these things. And so if we're not going to measure it, there's no way we're going to manage it. So this has been an ongoing issue for decades in the industry, and there's a variety of reasons for that. But ultimately, what we want to do is bring some awareness to the industry that there are ways to measure these things and then also manage and or change those things. So first and foremost, on the slide here, you're going to see this inverted U. So this bell curve basically represents something in performance psychology that we use quite a bit to conceptualize stress in regards to performance. So at the intersection of performance, the X and the Y axis there, there's no need to perform, therefore there's no stress. You're either asleep or you're dead, hopefully asleep. The idea is that there's no need to perform, so there's no need to feel any stress with that. But the moment we need to take action on something, if we're sitting on the couch, if we need to stand up, if we need to get up in the morning and take a shower, put our clothes on, take the garbage out, do our jobs, there's a variety of performance components here that we will require a certain level of friction or stress to get that inertia in our energy moving. When we start to feel that friction, we start to then get engaged some more. We're moving our energy conceptually into this aspect. But at the top of the curve, if you've ever heard of flow state, being in the zone, that's what this is. You feel fully engaged, energized, and challenged. You're being utilized to the best of your capacity. The challenge here is that we only have so much physical, mental, and emotional energy that we begin to drain our energy levels down. When we do that, we start to move to the right-hand side of this bell curve where we start to get fatigued. And then if we continue working in that mode, we start to get exhausted. And if we continue working in that and expending our energy, we're going to hit burnout. That's the simplified concept behind this. And for what I do and what we do, the idea is to identify who you are when you're performing at your best, which would be on the left-hand side of that bell curve. Are you calm? Are you positive? Are you optimistic? Are you physically? What does your body look like? Right? When you're performing well and things are going your way, it's easy to have a smile on your face. The challenge, though, is when we dip into the right-hand side of that curve and start to quote unquote struggle, when we're starting to get fatigued, that smile starts to wear away. When we're exhausted, it's definitely gone for the most part. So, how do we notice these things and then be able to make a change to pull ourselves back, re-energize, recover, and those types of things? That's the idea. I'm going to highlight this real briefly, but I'm going to move forward just for the sake of time. Within the state of stress report, everyone's going to have access to that. You can download the digital version for no charge on the greenshoeconsulting.com website under state of stress. I'll also make sure to have that available through Rob in the Metal Mining ISAC. But this specifically outlines a very interesting concept in the cybersecurity space, which adds to a lot of stress and challenges for CISOs and cybersecurity professionals. I'm going to let you take a look at this. It explains it fully, but the idea is that when we are dealing with a market where you have buyers and sellers and who has the leverage and the power in that space, you think about a market with lemons, so the used car market. The seller has all of the knowledge on the product and the buyer does not. So the seller has the power in that relationship. The buyer is reliant on the seller to disclose any challenges with that product. And oftentimes that doesn't happen. So the buyer buys a car that has issues and is thus a lemon. A lines market, like the auto insurance market, the buyer has more power in that because the buyer can go to multiple different providers to get quotes, different premium offerings, etc. So the buyer really has more knowledge than the seller does. In a silver bullet market, which is what we're using to define the cybersecurity space, both the buyer and the seller lack knowledge on their product or service, which makes it very challenging because the vendors have a really hard time being able to articulate what product, what they have, how it works, how it doesn't work, etc. And the cybersecurity professionals are trying to make the best decision based upon lack of information. So it leads to all the challenges on the right-hand side of this, or on the right-hand side of this slide, which increases stress. So I encourage you to take a look at that in the state of stress report. One of the key findings further that we came up with is different personas for CISOs. I was hoping to make this more of a magic quadrant like Gartner. Unfortunately, these are not static components. These are very much dynamic. So the idea is you may kind of default into more of a tactical CISO, which is hands-on keyboard is the default. You get really good as a hands-on keyboard professional, but then somebody notice your competency in that capacity, and so they promote you up into a management role to train five others to be as effective as you were with your hands-on keyboard. But that requires a different set of skills as a manager of people, which is more the skills that we teach, all of the soft skills, emotional intelligence, etc. So the challenge becomes when things get hard, you default into that mode of being hands-on keyboard, but you also take things personally. You focus on things and try to control things that you don't have control over, which just makes you more angry, frustrated, irritated, annoyed, etc. And your stress levels will typically go up. But the challenge here is that in some environments, the tactical CISO may have less stress because you fit in that type of environment. Versus the ideal state for us is to be the adaptive CISO who understands that their job is to advise the business. The business owns the risk. And as the advisor, you are advising the business on what you can do to minimize or lessen the risk for them in their environment. Only they, though, have the full accountability on if they're going to lower the risk or not. So that adaptive CISO knows what they have control over, what they don't. They focus on what they have control over, and they're focused on advising and setting boundaries. So there's a lot of differences there. And you have the ability then to also set some boundaries and understand how to operate more effectively. You delegate more in a variety of different components. So some interesting components there. Um, I'm going to mention this and I'm going to jump forward to a couple of things, again, being mindful of time here. So in asking these 40 CISOs, is cybersecurity unpredictable? The resounding answer was yes. 96% of the participants said yes. And the idea was kind of like the Mike Tyson quote, everybody had a plan until they got punched in the mouth. So they had a plan for the year and had about 60% unplanned things come up. And that lack of control makes it really unpredictable. That's a really important point. The control piece is one of six areas that we look at to identify any mismatches individually in terms of your job and your environment. So, organizationally, do you have the resources to manage your workload? A lot of times it's a big no, as this indicates for a lot of cybersecurity professionals. The reporting structure. If you are reporting into the CIO or CTO, your stress levels, based upon the research, show that there's a conflict of interest there, which makes it really hard to do your job effectively. So your stress levels are going to be higher versus if you are reporting into legal, chief operating officers, the CEO, etc. There's more of an understanding that you are the thought leader and expert in your space. Therefore, there's not that conflict of interest you would have with the CIO or CTO. So I would be interested to find out for those in attendance, whether in person or remotely, who you're reporting into. Something for us to think about. And then finally, as I mentioned, if you're not measuring this, there's no way to manage it. So the idea here is that the CISOs really struggle to identify how long does it take for you to recover after a major incident. So when you hit some high levels of stress, how do you know when you've come back down? Because I would imagine, based upon our conversations and the research and my 20 years of experience in the industry, that there's a lot of people that may not fully come back down to baseline in terms of physical, mental, and emotional types of homeostasis to be able to be back at your calm, effective self. So the idea here is we want to be able to change that. That's part of what the purpose of this research is to help educate the industry as a whole and then offer recommendations to change, but also educate CEOs and board members on we really need more support as an industry because the job that we do is very critical. It's very important because you're protecting critical infrastructure, you're protecting people, and all kinds of things that help us live effective lives. And if you're not able to do your job because you're burnt out, then we're not protected. So, forward-looking implications, the idea that this research is just the tip of the iceberg. We're going to expand this research annually to include more CISOs, to include incident response, the SOC, et cetera, and get more sophisticated in terms of how we're actually researching this. So, including biometric measurements and other components that allow us really to understand what happens to you physically, mentally, and emotionally when you are under immense pressure and strain? How do we then offset that and be able to help you manage your stress more effectively and prevent burnout? So, I'm now going to switch over to the Metals and Mining ISAC survey that was conducted. These are going to be very number intensive charts. So there's not going to be visually appealing components here, but I want to hit on some stories behind these because this is where I think there's some very relevant information to be discussed amongst everybody who's on site at the conference and virtually. So a lot going on here. But first and foremost, on the left-hand side of the screen, there's a couple what I'll call remedial points. So first and foremost, 13% of the 30 participants that responded to the surveys that were sent out 13% do not agree that it's clear how their work contributes to the company's meeting their objectives. Not a huge number. Just wanted to point that out. That's kind of the start of the trend here. But as you move down to the left-hand side of the screen, you start to move into some increasing numbers and maybe some more concerning numbers. So, 7 out of the 30 participants said that they do not agree IT management understands the role that their team plays in meeting IT management objectives. That's nearly 1 in 4 people. Not a great amount of people, not a great number there if you're wanting to be highly productive and a high performing environment. Now, as we move over to the middle of the screen, this is where things start to get interesting. 12 out of 30 of the participants, 40%, did not agree that their senior management, the CEO, CFO, or COO, understands the role that their team plays in meeting the company objectives, and specifically the senior management objectives. That's nearly half of the participants. That shows a major disconnect between the team and the organization as a whole, and that's highly concerning. And if you move down from there, you have an increase to 13 out of the 30 participants, 43%, do not agree that operations understands the role that their team plays in meeting operations objectives. So again, this idea of being very siloed in the organization and not being able to do your job because there is a conflict between different units. That's how I read that. An interesting stat on the right was 7 out of the 30 participants, 23%, rated their mental health at fair or poor. So I'm going to say that because the question itself was, how would you rate your mental health? Uh, is it, I forget the exact thing. There's 5 different options. Uh, Negative, poor, fair, good, or super good. I know that's not the exact one, but it was something of that effect. So without the description, similar to me asking you to rate yourself on a burnout scale, if you don't fully understand what burnout is and what the symptoms are, then you're ineffectively rating yourself, right? So I'd be interested to delve into that more. The last one on this slide is 12 out of 30 of the participants, 40%, said that they feel stressed always or most of the time at work. Again, defining what stressed actually means, it would be interesting to find out here, but that's a large amount of the participants saying that most of the time or always they feel stressed. That to me would mean you feel a lot of pressure. You feel like you don't have the resources to do your work. A variety of things can lead into that, but we want to delve into that further. Now, moving forward, I'm not going to hit on all these, but again, what I wanted to ask on this slide was twofold. On the left-hand side of the slide, I colored these as an amber. So what we focus on is the RAG system. Red is there's some major issues that we need to address. Amber is more that yellow color, so that's it needs to be investigated and dealt with, but green in that RAG system is positive and good, right? The challenge here is that you had 33% of the participants in the survey, 10 out of the 30, said that they lost at least more than one day at work for mental health reasons out of the year. So it could have been up to a week. That's a pretty big impact because um, that is showing the response to extended stress and burnout. So I was going to highlight this in red, but I wanted to get people's feedback on whether or not you would consider that a red or an amber coloring based upon the concerning aspect of that. Is that concerning having 33% saying they took more than one day and up to a week off throughout the year because of mental health reasons? And then similarly below that on the left-hand slide or left-hand side of that slide, 33%, again, 10 out of 30, do not agree that their organization makes mental health a priority. So to me, that continues the long-standing behavior of shut up and do your job. You're getting paid to do a job. We don't care what's going on with you mentally and emotionally. Do the job, or we will replace you and get you out of this position. So I'm curious. I would have also put that at red, but I put it at amber. just because I wanted to have that discussion. Now I'm going to skip some of the other numbers, but on the right-hand side of the screen, some other disturbing numbers coming out of this survey. 33% of the participants agree or strongly agree they get contacted for work issues during non-working hours. So one of the challenges in this industry is being able to set boundaries between work and personal life, being on call 24/7, and not being able to set those boundaries so you have the time to separate yourself from work, to switch your mind off from work and focus on your personal development because that's just as important as your work life. And if you're not being able to take time to focus on yourself, your personal hobbies, your health, your family, etc., if that's being interfered with, that's an issue. And then finally on this slide, 60% agree or strongly agree that remaining connected to work or that they remain connected to work when on vacation or PTO. 60%. So this is another issue that came out of our research is that 100% of the CISOs said they are still taking phone calls, Slack team messages, or Zoom sessions, or responding to email. So that means you're still not switching off from work and allowing your mind, body, and emotions and all that stuff to reset, recover, and get back to baseline. It's the point of a vacation or a PTO. So the challenge is how do we start to look at that as this is your sacred time and you need to have a staff or people or somebody else that has the ability to manage that load when you're not there. Because without that, you are on hook all of the time and you have no ability to turn off. Finally, super, super busy screen here. Um, One of the questions that required an entry of information was how would you describe your mental health today? How does work and workplace stress impact that? These are quotes, so I'm not calling anybody out, but these are quotes that I wanted to share because this information is pretty impactful. One, it shows that you're not alone. Part of the challenge, which many of these point out, is that there's a trend to isolate when we feel overwhelmed or stressed, and there's a lot of introverts in cybersecurity. I'm one of those. I spend my energy when I'm in social situations. I recharge alone. But the challenge is that we're tribal creatures. Connection and community is a big aspect of who we are as human beings. So when we're isolating, we're breaking that human psychological need. So the challenge is to identify when you need to recharge on your own, but also incorporate recharging around others, around hobbies and around friends, around family, etc. And so when you look at this, there's a couple things that I wanted to point out before I wrap up. The first quote here is, how would you describe your mental health today? Generally pretty good. Workload is quite high, and I'm being pulled in many different directions. It's hard to stay focused on any one task. That is definitely increasing my stress level. What we noticed in our research, because it was all self-reporting, was cybersecurity professionals are taught not to trust other people in the first place, and you're taught not to express mental and emotional challenges in the workplace environments. So the ability to trust that this information is not going to be used against you or that it's not going to be exposed in a way that outs you, that's a big trust ask when you're conditioned not to operate that way. So my read into this is that even saying this person's workload is quite high is probably an understatement. They're probably understating it to give the impression that they're able to manage a lot of these things while also saying they're being pulled in many different directions. So the instability and the chaos of their environment is hard to manage. So how do you get your work done when you can't stay focused on any one task? It's very hard to do. Secondly, I'll move over to the right-hand side of the slide. Um, Mental health is currently low due to lack of resources and high demands. The second one here, though, the horrors persist, but so do I. That's a big adjective or way to describe your environment is the horrors. Working in a 24-hour global organization makes it extremely difficult to disconnect. High expectations. I would also wonder if that's unrealistic expectations. Block 100% of the bad stuff. That's your job. And a geographically dispersed team create additional challenges to manage off time appropriately. One of the CISOs that we interviewed from a global corporation with tens of thousands of users said he gets 3 hours of sleep a night because he's up at 4 in the morning at the latest to take phone calls from the other side of the world and work back, and he's working throughout the evening. He's on marriage number three, and he's not so sure if that marriage number three is going to be lasting. So his personal life is taking a shellacking. I'm going to jump down to the color-coded quote on this one because this is, I think, very important. Mental health, to be honest, is on shaky grounds. I find after work, I'm less likely to get involved with anything. I just want quiet time where I don't interact with anyone, no interest with my hobbies, just eat, watch a bit of TV, check my email or work, sleep, and repeat. Weekends, I do errands and try to relax, but once again, work slips in. Lack of boundary. The company promotes mental health through various means. However, they don't live it. So they're paying lip service to it. Leaders work through their vacation and time off. It's the unspoken rule. Sure, you can take time off, but it just piles up until your return. So you spend many extra hours on the days back catching up, or you can work through vacation to stay afloat. So a lack of support, a lot of demands, not enough resources, no boundaries between these things. All of this makes it very challenging. So what can you do? Almost against my time, so I'm going to hit these very quickly. There's a lot more information. You'll have access to this full presentation as well, but individually, model recovery practices. I'm going to list out a variety of things that you can start to experiment with, but start somewhere, and I'm going to give you one specific thing that you can do immediately after this. Set cognitive boundaries. So, meeting hygiene specifically, do you have rules to accept meetings or deny them? Specifically, is there an agenda? Is there a time component? What outcome are we going to get out of this? Can this be done by email? Do we even need to have a meeting for this? Right? Those things begin to allow you to take more control of your own time and schedule, which allows you to feel less stressed. As a team, normalize stress conversations, conduct stress check stand-ups. We're going to talk about that in a second. Organizationally, align workloads with capacity. Maslach's areas of work life are the 6 areas that I talked about that we measure on and are included in this presentation, but prioritize control, fairness, and recognition. Recognition is a super easy one to use, but very overlooked. If somebody does something positive, acknowledge them in the team meeting. Call them out. Even if it's, hey, we had a team meeting and I tried to say something, nobody heard me, everybody overtalked me. But then Bob stood up and said, hey, Steve was trying to say something. Steve, would you mind repeating yourself so we can all hear it? Acknowledging Bob for that is a way to say, hey, that was really awesome. I appreciated you. I acknowledge you for doing that. Thank you. Do more of that. I'm going to skip through this stuff, as I mentioned, and get to this. So we are coming up with some ways to measure stress and energy coming forward with our everybody's used to the mean time to recovery and cybersecurity operations. So this is a mean time to human recovery. We're going to be pulling that out in March and beta testing that with a small group. But essentially, it allows us to measure your ability to recover to baseline after you've had any small or large stressful event. And I'll jump past this, but this is the check-in that I wanted to give you. So, to be able to start talking about normalizing stress conversations, a very easy way to do it is on any one-on-one call with your team members, any team meetings or staff meetings that you have. Start it off with this 3-question check-in. How energized are you on a scale of 1 to 5? 1 is the least, 5 is the most. If somebody says a 3 or less, what's blocking you right now? What's draining your energy? They can explain, and then you can ask, how can I help? The biggest aspect to this is the moment that they give you something in terms of how you can help, if it's reasonable and something within your control, you need to do it. Because if you don't, you're essentially just opening up that wound and then showing them you don't care. So this is a very simple way to create belonging, community, acknowledging somebody in terms of who they are and seeing them, all these psychological needs that we all yearn for. This is a very easy way that you can start to incorporate a lot of that engagement and community building on your team. These are some ways that you can start to incorporate some mini recoveries throughout your day. So, picking something, even if it's just standing up and stretching at your desk after a 30-minute meeting or an hour-long cycle of work, whatever it is, that's standing up and stretching, getting some water, going to the bathroom, whatever. Those things allow you to separate from work and just breathe a little bit. And it's amazing if you do that throughout the day, how that actually allows you to recharge throughout the day instead of just burning yourself into the ground. Um, Feel free to reach out for me to these. Time is up. So these are a couple small components that you can implement. And this is a large list of tools and ways to manage stress. With that being said, my call to action is to spread the word. If you're interested in what we do, I encourage you to download the State of Stress report, take a look at it, read through it, share your thoughts with me through LinkedIn, share any feedback, any criticisms, any of that stuff is fully welcome. And then if you're interested, I'm happy to talk to your team, to hold some space for you all and discuss how we can actually help change some of this within your organization. So please feel free to reach out to me via LinkedIn, and let me know how I can support you and your team. And I will welcome you to the Resilience Rebellion, which is what we're calling this move. I'm a Star Wars fan, but this movement in the industry to change the high levels of stress and burnout, we are referring to as the Resilience Rebellion, and you are now a part of it. So thank you very much. These are a few resources I will point out. The Bite Me is a joke book that is available on Amazon. This is a way to say thank you to the cybersecurity community, but also just throw some jokes out to many of us who take ourselves too seriously, try to lighten the mood a little bit. So, with that being said, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the conference and be well.